So welcome to The Bunker in Conversation With, where we speak to local influential creative people from the area. And this week it gives me great pleasure to introduce Claire Dupree from Narc Magazine. Hi, Claire.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me.
No, thanks for coming. It's been a long time coming, really. Kind of, I think most of the conversations we have are just, you're chasing me for ads or content or whatever over the years. I've never really kind of got down and found out much about you, really. So hopefully this is the opportunity to do that.
Very nice.
What I wanted to kind of start with, just you growing up and, how music and art and creativity kind of really first touched you and how it led to where you are now.
So it all began in so I'm from Reading originally. Yeah. I'm not from the northeast. I was a bit of a child of the 80s, 90s. So I was born in 1980. And formative years, kind of 14, 15, 16, all my mates were in bands and, we were listening to Nirvana and, all that kind of a bit into the grunge sort of scene and early emo stuff and noisy things, I guess. Because most of my mates were in bands, I have zero technical or musical ability whatsoever. So I was, usually the girlfriend of the guitarist, I'm afraid. I was the groupie.
It's an important role.
And it is, absolutely. Yeah. Basically the roadie, which I still continue to be to this day, to be fair. Just kind of, a group of us always, obsessed with music, and we'd spend all day on some holidays watching MTV all day. And, it's fairly typical, I imagine, of someone my age. But yeah, I couldn't kind of do it. But I always had an interest in music and a love of it. And as I grew up, I always loved reading and writing. I used to write short stories and things like that when I was a kid. And at some point, I kind of realised, actually, those two things can kind of go together. But I didn't have a clue how to actually do that. So, it took me a good long time before I actually figured out how to make those things actually happen. Yeah. But I moved up here in 2002 and so set up Narc 2006. But kind of in the meantime, I discovered the Northeast music scene, started going to gigs at Head of Steam in the Cumberland Arms and, watching these brilliant bands. It was nothing like Reading, despite the fact Reading has, a festival, which is reasonably famous, and it's had some amazing stuff come through it. There wasn't a scene, really, that I kind of knew. So discovering a community and a scene and, people who were as passionate about music as I was and all these varied and interesting things that were going on, I couldn't get enough of it. So I went to everything every night for a long time.
So that time when you came up was probably not long after the time that I kind of got involved in the bunker, and I think there was it was a bit of a strange time. I think the kind of the mid-noughties thing hadn't kicked off, but there were still a lot of great bands from around here. But I always remember thinking that the bands around the scene in Sunderland and Newcastle, bands didn't necessarily want to work together or collaborate or maybe not as much as they do now. Yeah. What kind of then made you think, actually, I'm going to set something up and write about this? Had you written things before?
Yeah, I mean, I'd done, bits of creative writing, but nothing on a journalism level. I mean, I don't have any qualifications. I don't go to uni. I have English A levels, and media studies. That's all I kind of have in terms of qualification. So it's all been a little bit learned by seeing what other people are doing. I mean, for a year solid, I read nothing but music magazines. I bought everything from like Total Guitar to the Metal Hammer. I bought all of it, and I read it from cover to cover and just kind of learned the things that I liked and things that I didn't like. I was, or tried to be, mates with James McMahon, James Jam at the time. He was a little bit kind of above me in terms of, the work he was doing. He was writing for The NME at the time, and I remember sort of looking at his career and knowing that he'd started in Sunderland and he started in the Northeast music scene and thinking, wow, well, if someone like him can be, the editor of NME and he, coming from Sunderland and doing or studying Sunderland rather, and doing, the stuff in the local scene, then, maybe I could. We had a few chats and, he gave us a little bit of inspiration. But in general, I didn't really do very much. I started writing for The Crack. I did a few bits and pieces. And then eventually because I worked for the Evening Chronicle at the time, the Journal magazine, the Culture magazine, this RIP,
Yeah.
no longer together. And they gave me my own page. I called it Adrenaline. I had an awful photograph of me in a really terrible leather biker jacket, and it was pretty bad.
Did you think of the name as well?
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry. But it kind of, it was about culture in the Northeast, and I was like, well, there's nothing in this about music unless you're talking about Northern Symphonia, which is great, but, so I wanted to write about local bands, and for some reason they said yes. And that experience and the little contacts I made, I remember literally sweating through my hands when I interviewed Peter Brewis on the phone, thinking like, this is amazing. This is the thing I want to do. But I was trained in the advertising side of sort of newspaper world. So that's my background. Yeah. And that's kind of the thing that working at the Chronicle was good. I basically went and sat with all the different departments and just kind of looked over everyone's shoulder and went, how do you do your job? And then quit and started my own magazine. And that was 2006.
15 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at the time, I think we'd probably doing the Bunker magazine. There were and the crack was around. But it was at that time when I think printed press was probably kind of, well, not quite at its peak, but it was still, loved and sought after, and it came at the right time. Yeah. Did you? Was it a conscious decision, or was it just kind of, oh, look, here's an opportunity, or just I'm a little bit bored, I want to work for myself? Or
I just, to be honest, I didn't really ever think about what it meant to work for yourself. I was a bit naive, really, when I started it, thinking, I certainly didn't expect to make any money, and still don't make any money, but it was just because there weren't enough publications that I could write for that would let me write as much as I wanted to write, and I was seeing all this amazing music, and Narc really was mainly music at the very beginning. And I just didn't have anywhere to say about it. I couldn't say enough about it. So the idea was literally, set up my own magazine so that I can say as much as I want to say and involve the people that I was meeting who also had an opinion and not always necessarily the qualifications to write, but who had a passion and could, get that across. Yeah. So that was the thing, really. And it probably wasn't really ever a thing I thought, oh, I'm going to set up myself in business and I'm going to be successful. It was like, I'm going to give it a try. And I remember at the beginning, people, usually my parents and, people who were well-meaning and say things like, oh, well, if it doesn't work, you've got some good experience and you'll be all right. And I'm like, what do you mean if it doesn't work? If all else fails, you can go back and get another job, which kind of probably made me more determined to say, well, why shouldn't it, be successful? Why shouldn't it be something? Because I think it's providing an outlet for people like me. I was really just writing for myself, to say, look at all this cool stuff there is, go and check it out. So
I think that fall back on conversation that a lot of creative people have with their parents that, tends to just spur them on to try and prove them wrong, which, great that it did. But it's hugely inspirational, though, I think, hopefully for younger people to see this, to think that you don't have to go to uni and study journalism and get that qualification, that, follow your dreams, as it were, and just give something a go. Yeah. Do you think that if you were the same age now in today's society, you'd do the same? Because it seems people are less willing to maybe give things a go, despite, maybe because they can hide behind kind of avatars or sort of, online presences. It's
funny. I don't think I would. I think obviously I'm not so old that the internet wasn't a thing, but the internet and we didn't have a website particularly for a long time, and it wasn't a thing. We were talking earlier about how wonderful it is to have a magazine and to hold something and to have something in print, and I think there's something really special about that. Whereas now, there is any kind of blog and website, and anyone can do it, which is excellent, and I love coming across really well written sites and people who are passionate, but I think I probably would be very frightened of setting up a magazine now. It's not the easiest of industries to succeed in, but I think it is great that people can just choose to do this stuff if they want to, and I'm a big advocate of that, particularly if you don't have qualifications, if you don't have skills. I had none of those things, and I could still do it because I had a passion, and I saw and met some great people who also had those passion and those that need to talk about the music they were seeing and want to influence other people. So I think it's probably more about a drive to want to do what you want to do, and surround yourself with great people who want to, see that succeed as well. But yeah, it's all a brave new world, and social media probably hasn't helped and is the bane of my life. But
But
it's necessary evil.
Yeah, necessary evil. Yeah. So 15 years in print, which is great, and. How many 15 CDs therefore of 15 compilations?
So we do a birthday compilation every year to celebrate, I suppose, kind of reflecting back on the year before and on some of the great music that we've discovered. So we stopped doing CDs in, maybe 7 years ago. 6 years ago, because it got too expensive. I couldn't afford to publish, couldn't afford to press them anymore. I hated spending days sticking the things to the front of the magazine, and then when you deliver them, they all fall off. We went through lots of different adhesives to figure out that. Bathroom sealant doesn't work, by the way. Someone told me it did, and it really didn't. So lots of compilation CDs. We've never repeated a band. We've had hundreds, loads and loads. So that's quite a nice thing to look back on. But now they're all on Bandcamp to download for free.
Yeah, I know. Yes, it's a nice little resource for us and our radio show. I sneakily go on and get those. Yeah. So I mean, what does the future hold for Narc? Do you think?
Well, obviously, with the last year, we were forced online, we were forced into digital, which I'd say forced. I mean, I've never really wanted to be a digital magazine, I wanted to be an actual physical thing. But we went online just to make sure we could still serve the people we wanted to serve, and talk to people about this great stuff that was happening. Because despite, everything being shut, people were still creative and people were still doing things. So we went online, and that's going to stay. I think it was something I resisted before because I wanted people to go out and pick up magazines, and when they were in a shop or a pub or whatever, buy a ticket or buy a pint or buy a coffee. And it all supports a kind of a regional economy. But we'll keep the digital edition. Accessibility is increasingly important, and it just gives us another way to get a bit further out of the Northeast and show people, what's out there. And we've been doing Narc TV as well, the sort of magazine style performance and interview program. I mean, really, as long as we can get it funded, it'd be something we'd love to do, continue to do. I think even though music is back on physical stages, I still think there's room for, this kind of stuff online as well. People want to see performance and again showcasing regional artists, which is what we're all about. So
I mean, formerly as an artist myself and kind of working with artists over the last 20 years, it's super important to have that outlet. And why do you think it is that the media in the Northeast, other than things like Narc, Crack and some of the sort of smaller radio stations, tend not to give them the sort of the attention they deserve, other than maybe when they want to, I don't know, pat themselves on the back, kind of, when not deservedly, really.
I think it's probably all about shareholders and money somewhere along the line. I think, the regional newspapers, having worked on one for many years, they have really small teams, and even more so now. Certainly when I was at the Evening Chronicle, they had a huge, gigantic room full of journalists, and now I know they've got like a handful of hot desks. There's hardly anyone left anymore, and people are really stretched. There used to be a dedicated ENTS writer, entertainment sort of team, and I think it's probably not from. Well, it's about selling papers at the end of the day, isn't it? It's whether or not they think a regional scene is something that's interesting. When I was younger, I remember kind of speaking to people, and people had the attitude of like, oh, well, they're just a local band. They're not famous. I'm not going to listen to their music on the radio that I listen to. They're just a local band. And that used to really, really get on my nose because, your just local band is tomorrow's support act and the day after's headliner. Someone's got to start somewhere. And for people to be, and particularly the press to be so dismissive of that, I think just is really unhelpful and doesn't really support anybody anywhere, and in terms of the economy and the ecology of the scene. So I think other press probably have other agendas to deal with and would rather sell, what's going to go in their pages than have a genuine passion about it, or at least a way to give people a voice. any band, any person who's creating something in the Northeast, I want them to talk to us and to say, we're really approachable and we really like to hear from people and, support what they're doing, even if they don't do it quite the right way in terms of approach, or they, don't always have all the stuff that they need, which is a thing. Lots of bands don't. We want to hear from them. We want to talk to them. And I think increasingly as my kind of job has gone on, I've liked to do that kind of more supportive role and explain when a band just emails me and says, write about my song. Then I say, well, okay, yes, but how about you put these few things together first, and here's my normal deadlines, and come back to me at this time, and try and walk them through that process. I think that's really important, and other publications and other people just don't have the time or the inclination to do that. So that's one of my things. I like to do that.
I mean, do you think that on a whole, obviously we've not really got a music industry infrastructure in the Northeast at all, but there are managers and there are promoters and there are publications and there are working industry people, but most of them it's a part-time thing possibly, or or unpaid or not, so it's maybe not as formal. But it seems to me that not only is the quality of the music in the Northeast kind of it seems like the best it's ever been, whether that's because of improvements in technology or just or whatever, but it seems that bands are a little bit more wiser now, and they're all kind of talking about EPKs and sending stuff over, and putting stuff together, which is great because there aren't probably a great deal of press agents available for them. But so has that arse-wiping kind of hand-holding thing got less, or is it still the same as it always has been?
No, it's not got less. No, but then there's loads more resources. I think that's the thing. If a band is savvy enough, you can just Google, how do I send out a press release, or what is a press release, and the information's there. There's loads of it there, and I know loads and loads of different regional companies and charities are putting that information out there freely available. Generator, Tees Music Alliance, the Bunker, obviously, you support musicians too. So I think there's lots of help out there, but I think also the world of press can be a bit scary, and I think some people are still a bit worried about making a mistake and emailing someone like Narc and saying, cover my music, and if they've got it wrong, that's it. That they're not going to get another chance, and that's definitely not the way we operate. We really like to be, there at the beginning. It's why we still got a demos page. Funny enough, having this conversation with my writer this week about our demo section, saying we hadn't got enough in for the section yet, and I had to, put a call out on social media to get bands to send me demos. We're the only local publication that has a demo page because I think it's really important that bands get that chance to make a mistake, or to, send something that's a bit rough and ready, and then get some little constructive criticism about how they can improve. And I think we have had bands go from the demo page to the cover within a handful of years, and I love to see that progression. And me offering a little bit of advice here and there is sort of part of that. I think I'd like to think that some of the things I said to someone actually went in, and they, and then they were successful somewhere else, and they got, onto a great blog or a site or another magazine or whatever it is, and had a little bit of pride in that. So that's a nice thing.
So you've managed to scrape through the pandemic with a little bit of travelling pre-pandemic. You were married, the year before that? You went travelling for quite a bit, didn't you? Yeah. And I mean, what was that like, leaving the baby at home? I remember just being jealous of all these pictures, thinking I wish I could do the same, and just didn't have the guts to do it.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm afraid I'm never going to stop doing that. I mean, so Paul and I, we've just loved travel for forever, and God, it was so long ago, 11 years ago, I had a bit of burnout, to be honest. It kind of got to the stage where I was working, 13, 14, 15-hour days to get the magazine out, and trying to do other freelance work to bring money in and all that kind of thing. And at a certain point, you just sort of go, nah, I can't do this anymore. And we went on a little holiday, and we went to Berlin. And I just remember thinking, oh, this is all right. I think I could get used to this. And through the help of a few people who sort of took on some of the more boring jobs of advertising and that sort of stuff, and through some super talented writers and assistant and a new editor, they kind of took over a little bit, and and off we went around the world, which was, I was super privileged to be able to do it. And I'm still very thankful that we're able to do that sort of thing, or were able to do that sort of thing. And it was a bit scary. And we didn't travel with a computer. We didn't have smartphones at the time. So it wasn't very easy to stay in touch. And I remember the odd occasion finding an internet cafe and going on like forums and Facebook and stuff and thinking, oh my God, what have they done? But it was usually fine. The editorial was always fine. I actually don't think you'd have noticed that I wasn't there because they did such a great job. It was the business end that I was like, but it was okay in the end. I managed to claw it back in the end, so it was fine. But yeah, so it was more scary coming back and having to sort of begin again a little bit. But having your eyes opened by travel is just is great, because it did that little bit of time away. I think gives you perspective and opens your mind to some other things. So I loved it.
Did you come back with loads more energy? Did it get rid of some of that kind of anxiety pre-travel?
Yeah, it did. I mean, to be honest, I came back to a bit of a horrible situation. I was sort of slightly in bed with some people that I didn't really want to be in bed with anymore. It's not on the editorial side, that was always great, but on the more business end, there were some decisions that were made that I wasn't part of through some people that I was working with that I didn't want to work with anymore. It was all a bit odd. And I think for a short time, I tried to work alongside some other people to make something a little bit bigger than what Narc was at that time. And that didn't really work out. I think I realised at that point I had a massive control freak instinct in myself that at the time wasn't a good thing, but now I'm really pleased about, because taking that control back over something that is, as you say, my baby, and it's like, my left arm, it's tattooed on my left arm, so it is literally my left arm. It's really important to me, and I think having that little bit of time away and then that little bit of a scary kind of business time after that made me realise how important it is, not just to me, but to other people as well. And all the people who write for it. And, we're very much a team and a community of people who just want to say great stuff about nice things. So that bit of perspective was good. Yeah.
I mean, obviously there was a decision made and that had to kind of happen at the time. But it sounds that Narc is very much a community, like the bunker. And I think that there have been times here similarly where, arrangements have changed and just haven't suited, and it can just, people sometimes just don't understand. Is that kind of back where it needs to be, and is it going to stay there now?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I think we're in the best place we've ever been, despite worldwide pandemics included. I think the team we have, David Saunders runs our website, Vicky Markham has always been our designer, and it's basically just the three of us who kind of muddle through all the important big jobs, and then we have 50 odd writers who sort of dip in here and there, and they're really supportive in that they have loads of knowledge that I don't have. They know loads of great stuff that I don't know anything about. They're passionate about scenes that I know nothing about, which is really helpful. But they come to me and say, "Oh, I've heard this great band, we should interview them," or "I was talking to so and so in the pub, and they've got this record coming out, let's do that." And that community of people who actually care is really important, I think, is what makes it what it is. If it was just me writing about the things I liked, it'd be terrible, because I still like 90s emo.
So have you got favourite sort of best moment, best issue maybe, and is there a worst issue?
Some pretty terrible interviews in the past. Bizarrely, I think one of my favourite issues was the April last year when we couldn't publish properly. The first year we couldn't publish. I remember driving home from my office that I've since had to give up because I can't afford it anymore. Driving in my car and having to stop the car because I was crying so much, thinking about how I was going to get the magazine out and what was going to happen. Oh, it'll only be a couple of months, or it'll only be 3 weeks, or it'll only be 6 weeks, and it'll only be a couple of months, and what's going to happen to this thing I've spent 15 years building. And then thinking about what I was going to put on the cover, and it kind of, jumping into my head, right, I'm going to write down all the places that are shut, all our distribution outlets, all the places that can't open on our cover. And that was one of my favourite decisions I think that I've made. I think it set us out. It set our stall out from the beginning of we're still here, and we always will be here. And that sort of meant quite a lot to me, I think, and to some other people too.
Yeah.
And then we made posters, and I actually got to eat that month because I made posters and sold them, which was good. So yeah, that was probably one of my favourites. But yeah, some terrible interviews. I interviewed Carl Barat from Libertines at the time, and he only gave me one-word answers throughout an entire interview, so that was fun. And then when I complained to the PR agent, I interviewed one of the other guys, the guitarist, the one that nobody can remember, and he was off his nut. He was on something and he didn't shut up. So that was an interesting one. We nearly got sued by Lou Reed for interviewing him. That was fun.
What, you weren't supposed to be interviewing him, or?
No, I probably shouldn't even say, because it was a while ago now. Right. But we were told not to ask certain questions, mainly about his naughty behaviour in the past, and my writer decided to ask him anyway, and we were told not to publish the interview, but we did. Oops. Yes, some interesting decisions. But in general, most people are nice and lovely, and it's, I still get a bit scared when interviewing people, particularly famous musicians that I really like. I told Simon Neil from Biffy Clyro that I loved him. Probably shouldn't have done that. But I'm still a fan at the end of the day, and when you get to speak to your musical heroes, it's quite cool. And I still feel like that, even though I do less and less of these interviews these days. I leave it to people who are often better at it than I am. It's still really nice to chat to people about something cool. So
yeah,
it's good.
Great. So is there I know you do quite a lot of talks, advice sessions, and kind of drop-ins and things like that, and seem to kind of love doing those, really enthusiastic. It must be great. You said showing some of the younger people that it's not too difficult a thing, something that possibly maybe seems more difficult, picking up a guitar and writing a song. They seem easy to be able to do, but not do something like this. You've just been awarded some money from Youth Music, so is that going to enable you to do something different because of the circumstances now? Is it something you've always wanted to do, or what?
Yeah, so the Youth Music thing is basically enabled us to. It's the first time we've ever had any funding, and it's enabled us to support some young writers, because I think there's lots of resources out there for musicians, and I do lots of these sorts of, as you say, lots of talks and seminars, and mostly pretty much all free to access stuff. But looking at me when I was 17, 18, wanting to write about bands, I didn't have anywhere to turn. I didn't know how to do that. It seemed really unattainable, and the local paper didn't want to know. There was nothing for me. So I wanted to set up something for young people to write. So we're setting up the Narc Academy. It's a little bit cheesy, but never mind. And we're taking 4 young people, and we're going to teach them everything that we do. So everything from reviewing to writing articles, to interviewing people, to podcasting, radio broadcast, Narc TV, film editing, everything that we do, putting on events, social media marketing, accounts, the whole thing, the whole shebang. So hopefully that will encourage these people to do some of the stuff that I've done, and set up their own rival publications. I hope not, but to kind of put their best foot forward, and give people some opportunities that perhaps I would never have had. And increasingly, as I've got older, I've started to really enjoy that sort of mentoring kind of role, and helping people to realise that they can do a lot of this stuff. And as you say, I will never ever be able to write a song. I couldn't, play an instrument. I've never done any of these things. But musicians just, they've got far more skills than they realise that they have, I think. Yeah. So I like to just kind of help along, and hopefully the same thing for Narc Academy. And out of that, we're going to get to do another series of Narc TV as well. We're going to make some little mini documentaries. So yeah, a few things in the pipeline, but it's something I'd like to continue to do. So yeah. Cool. Fun.
So the TV, the 2 series so far, you can do another a third series, yeah?
Yeah.
So that came from kind of an idea of trying to people see live music during lockdown. How's that gone? And where's it going to go?
Yeah, it's been really good. Yeah, it was a purely selfish reason. I just wanted to go and watch some bands, and I wasn't legally allowed to, except in work environments. So I put some on. Yeah, I mean, really, we were both David and I, having very lengthy discussions when we were fed up and had, not very much to do, to say how much we were missing the thrill of a live gig, and particularly a performance by a band. A really full on, exciting live performance. And we just wanted to really showcase some of those. I think back at the beginning of lockdown, there was a lot of like Facebook Live stuff, and everyone in his guitar got out there, and that was great because it did feel a really nice sort of gap. But we didn't feel that bands were getting that opportunity because it wasn't there. So we set up some, COVID safe and all that kind of stuff in local venues, and yes, we were able to showcase local venues at the same time as artists, give some sound engineers and lighting engineers some work, pay some bands to perform, and put out something for our audience that we knew they were really missing it. So it just ticked every single box really, and we were really, really proud of it. Steve Bargett, our filmmaker, is also in a band, and he's a freelancer too. So it's really important to keep those people in some work. Although he did it for very little money, bless him. he's increasingly getting better paid as we go along, as we get some more money. But yeah, it's a real privilege to do them, and we just have loads of fun. It's a proper treat. Yeah, it's really good.
I mean, what's your thoughts on how a lot of people outside of the community often try and offer bands payment by exposure? You get your chance to play or chance to whatever. It's dreadful, really, isn't it?
Yeah. There's still a lot of it going on, and it exists in all parts. It exists in the press world too. It happens a lot, and. Yeah, by no means we were able to pay anyone very much, unfortunately, but, a little bit helps, doesn't it? And I think, particularly when it comes to Narc and to the way that we operate, I like to hope and think that people see us as quite an ethical kind of business. Yes, we are fueled by advertising because it's a free magazine, but at the end of the day, we don't ask musicians to pay for that advertising. We don't charge for editorial. We don't do anything that way. It's very much a case of being there to serve the musicians, and I don't believe that musicians should have to pay for that sort of privilege to be in a publication. I think it looks bad on the publication and on the band, and nobody wins really. So yeah, there's a lot of it goes on, but it certainly doesn't come anywhere near us.
Good.
Yeah.
So your roles changed a little, I suppose a lot over the time. Is there a part of the job that you still dread and a part that you love? Is there a best and a worst part?
I used to say that I didn't like selling advertising, but actually I kind of do, because I get to talk to loads of people, and within those conversations I find out loads of cool news and things for articles. So I don't think there's anything I hate. I'm not always a fan of doing social media scheduling. It's just a bit boring. Those sorts of jobs can be a bit laborious sometimes. But even then, it's all about talking to an audience, and that's the privilege that we have. I think probably my favourite part of the month is when I look for articles, look for content, and things that are going on, and trawl the internet for, looking at everybody's websites and seeing what's happening, and filling a ridiculously big spreadsheet and then having to go through it and take things out because I can't fit it all in. That's one of my favourite jobs, which got quite heartbreaking during lockdown when there wasn't, every single website just said closed, shut, not operating, cancel, postponed. That was, challenging. But in general, I think that's probably my favourite part. That and actually get it in my hands. This is the first time I've had it in my hands for like
Does
6
it? I mean,
months.
do you still get that kind of feeling like a new toy or a new baby or a new pair of shoes or whatever?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It's I still the first edition we published 15 odd years ago, I remember seeing somebody on the metro reading it, and I couldn't stop myself, and I sort of tapped him on the knee and went, I did that, and he was like, okay, whatever, and sort of moved seats. But yeah, just seeing people reading it in the pub or at a venue or whatever, it still gives me a thrill, to know that we produced something that someone actually wants to sit and look through, and and there's going to be people who don't like it or who think that it's not for them, and that's fine. But there's plenty of other people who get some enjoyment out of it, and that's really important. And also, it's nice that being a physical thing, people can rip a page out when they've had an article in and stick it to the fridge and be proud of it and be something that somebody else has said nice things about us, and look, mum, someone says that what I do is important. And I think increasingly for musicians that it isn't a viable career, apparently. That's really cool for someone to be able to say, look, these people think I'm actually worth, writing about and filling some pages and talking about. So yeah, I still get the thrill from it, definitely.
Have you ever had, talking about people ripping bits out, have you ever had a local band really take offence to anything?
Yeah,
we can name names or not, but
yeah, I won't. To be honest, I couldn't. But I think back in the beginning, we were probably a little bit harsher about the demo sort of reviews and things than we probably should have been.
I mean, but that was a thing at the time, almost, wasn't it? A bit of sarcasm, kind of whatever. But now it does seem as if they're all very. Sort of more diplomatic, but more kind of encouraging. Yeah,
a bit more constructive, I think. Yeah, and I mean, I sort of grew up reading Melody Maker and stuff where it's like Holly's demo hell, and there was and they just literally eviscerated bands on the page. And I think for a while there was it was more about humour and about the that it was funny to say awful things. But the thing is, it's really easy to write awful things and much harder to write something that's constructive or that tries to explain what it is you mean when you say something doesn't quite gel with you. So I just think our writers have got better. I think musicians have perhaps got better, I hope. But yeah, it doesn't really serve anyone to say that anything's rubbish. At the same time, we have to be constructive because otherwise, everything is not great, and you have to reflect that. But hopefully we reflect by omission sometimes rather than anything else. But saying that, there's still loads of bands who don't know we exist and, obviously we want them to. So come to us.
Yeah, I mean, we get that. We still have people who, been here 40 years who walk past and look up and don't realise us here. I think there's always some bands, people who have blinkers on or don't look up, always look down. Yeah. So, one of the reasons why I want you to come, I think it is such an inspirational story. I think there's a big push to try and redress the gender balance in the industry, and I suppose to me there's a big issue. Our big kind of task is to try and get kids out of their bedrooms, off their devices or whatever, and get involved in scenes. What would your kind of bits of advice be, knowing, the pitfalls and what's worked, what hasn't worked for some young people now to try and, I suppose in a nutshell, what you're going to try and teach these new apprentices over the coming years? Yeah,
I suppose it's about having that passion, that drive. I think that's the important thing. Not necessarily knowing how to do a job, but figuring it out. I mean, that's what I did. When we first set up Narc, I just looked at these big blank pages on a computer screen and went, well, how do I do this then? I don't know how to do this. A bit of trial and error, I think. I think there are people out there who will give you advice, free advice, and will help. I think it's sorting out the sharks from the nice friendly fishes. There's lots of them around, so I think if people want to get involved in writing or in that kind of end of things, I would always love to hear from people and would always give people some advice. Unfortunately, it's not an industry where it's very easy to get paid for your work. I still don't really earn any money from Narc, and none of my writers do either. They all do it for the love of doing it. So it's not always the easiest of industries to get into, and I think music is probably pretty similar.
Yeah.
But yeah, just do it a lot. Write a lot, read a lot, talk to people, and just do your own thing. Set up a blog, write about stuff that you like. There's quite a lot of people doing it kind of on their own terms and under the radar, and doing the things they want to do because they love to write about it. And that's great. Just keep doing that, really. And if you want to write for us, give us a shout. But if not, just keep doing the thing you're doing. I think that's
I mean, do you find that many prospective writers have an issue having to kind of adhere, like you say, or move from their own terms to kind of understanding what the reader wants to read rather than what they think they want to read, or do they tend to sort of understand when they come along?
I suppose we don't really have a party line. Like when I've worked for publications in the past, they have a house style and a thing, there used to be stories, and back in the day on some large national publications I won't name, that you would have a whiteboard that would have all the bands listed that you weren't allowed to say nice things about. and who was going to had a hatchet job done on them this month. We don't have any party line, we don't have any agenda, and we don't have a singular voice. So it's made up of lots of people who have lots of different voices. So I don't really like to say to a writer, well, you shouldn't say it this way. My main advice to anybody is that everything they write should be descriptive, and that will enable the reader to understand what it is you're saying if you're trying to describe a band and describe a sound, rather than necessarily using comparisons or whatever it might be. But in general, we don't have a kind of, I kind of find sometimes that trained journalists are actually worse at writing about music because they have such restriction, they have such kind of really rigid guides that they have to write to, they've been taught to write to. And I have to kick it out of them a little bit sometimes and say, inject a bit of your personality. This is your article about the band that you like, or at least that I've told you to write about. Find something to love, find an angle that the reader is going to gel with. And, even if it's a bit weird, I tend to go off on the wildest of tangents sometimes when writing something, but, it's to hook a reader in. So, yeah anything goes really.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming, kind of ending on that note of a bit of advice to people. Hopefully there'll be, at least another 15 years and more of people getting involved and long live Narc.
Thank you very much.
But thanks very much for coming. I enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much.